I think I may have found a diamond in the rough here. The Raidmax Sigma case is everything you can ask for in a PC case. A perfect blend of style, ease of use, and airflow. Finally, a case that doesn't sacrifice style for functionality. How long have I been waiting for this? Hey, what's up guys, it's JD from JDTechGear and welcome back to the channel where we discuss PC passion, tech reviews, unboxings, and setup design. So if you're into that sort of thing, consider subscribing. Today, I've got something special for you. The Raidmax Sigma, a tempered glass mesh and aluminum accent panel, airflow friendly ATX case coming in at $80 and it is available in black and white. Honestly, this case is one of the best I've seen in this price range, which absolutely surprised me. So let's get into the features. This is a mid-tower case with support for ATX, micro ATX, and mini ITX boards. It has a full tempered glass panel with 4 removable thumb screws. It's 48.9 centimeters long, 21.4 centimeters wide, and 51.8 centimeters high. So this case has the support for 3 120 or 2 140 millimeters in the front, 2 120 or 2 140 millimeter fans on top, and 1 120 or 1 140 millimeter fan in the rear. It also has a CPU cooler support height of 180 millimeters and a GPU support length of 400 millimeters. So you'll be able to fit the baddest and maddest CPU coolers and GPUs in here. The front I/O has 2 USB 3.0 ports, headphone and mic jack, power button, and reset button. There's support for 2 SSD mounts in the rear and also 2 3.5-inch drives in the bottom of the case. And lastly, there's 2 dust filters, one for the front panel and another for the power supply. So let's go through all the functionality this case has to offer. The tempered glass panel is well made with a decent thickness and sturdiness to it. It has frosted, rounded edges accompanied with a black handling border, which makes it easy to handle and also hides fingerprints from handling. The dismount system is fairly straightforward by removing all 4 of the thumb screws. The thumb screws are completely metal and have a textured edge for better rotational grip. Be wary though, the thread is relatively short and they'll come out sooner than you think. Well, at least in my case, and I dropped them. The screws still have good integrity with mounting the panel. They won't pop out or rip out with their short threading. The glass panel sits on 4 standoffs that are covered in rubber, which is great to use, although they can come off easily and or get stuck inside the panel, but they still serve their purpose well and don't come off during installation of the tempered glass panel. This case also comes with 9 pre-installed motherboard standoffs for an ATX board, which is a nice added bonus. Speaking of bonuses, the case includes one 140mm blue LED Raidmax fan, and it's fairly silent at full speed, and here's what it sounds like with the camera mic about 1 foot away from the fan. For GPU mounting, Raidmax did it a little bit differently with this case. To install a GPU or any other PCIe/PCI peripheral, unscrew the corresponding screws to your GPU, then unscrew the slider and slide it over, and then install the GPU. Then slide the slider back into place and retighten the slider and then install the mounting screws for the GPU. For disassembly of the case, remove the rear panel with the 2 standard thumb screw design, and yes, these thumb screws are fully metal as well. It's attention to detail like this that makes the case higher quality, although it would have been nice to see these screws not have to fully come out when removing the rear panel. On the flip side though, there is no rubber washer or grommet for the thumb screws on the rear panel, which would have been nice to have seen, but it's not entirely necessarily since the back panel doesn't rattle around with this case. The front panel removes easily as well, but be cautious since there is an attached wire which leads to the down-facing LED. The wire is removable by disconnecting the Molex connector. The top panel removes very easily as well, and the I/O connections are not connected to it thankfully. It is separate. This was a problem I faced with the Thermaltake Versus C21 as I couldn't completely segregate the top panel from the top I/O. It's also worth noting that the hard drive is also removable. It can be removed unscrewing the 2 screws in the top of the PSU basement and the 2 bottom screws in the bottom of the case, and then just slide out the side wall panel for the hard drive cages. Moving on to the contents inside the case, it has quite a bit to offer. The power supply, hard drive bays, and SSDs can all be accessed from the rear. The power supply sits on rubber standoffs, which is preferred, and there's plenty of space to support larger power supplies and space to shove cables into, which is great. The 3.5-inch drives are removable by thumb screw, and hard drives along with the SSDs can be installed through the mounting holes. The hard drive tray also has rubber standoffs, which is another awesome detail to include. Not to mention that the tray is entirely metal and has arrows pointing it in the right direction, again with the details. The SSD trays are removed by unscrewing the thumb screw and sliding it off the mounting groove. The bottom of the feet of the case has rubber pads, another great feature. In the front of the case, the dust filter is incredibly easy to install and uninstall. To remove it, pull on the tab and open the filter like a door and unhinge it off the case. The dust filter is magnetic, which keeps it in place. The other dust filter for the power supply is removed by sliding it out of the groove. The case also features two LEDs, one in the front panel which casts a logo onto the surface beneath it, which is pretty cool, and another logo on the PSU basement, which is removable. The only downside to them is that they're blue. To have some sort of color option would have been nice, but they're subtle, and so the color remains pretty neutral for the most part. Other contents include the case screws and manual. The case screws come in a cardboard box and are assorted in separate, resealable, and labeled plastic bags. I really appreciate that they were separated and labeled accordingly, especially for new builders that could be confused with the screws being mixed or unlabeled. As for the manual, it's very easy to read with detailed diagrams with plain English, which is all I can ask for from a manual. This really adds a nice overall polish to the case. Now for the cable management. The style of the cable management this case supports is through an indentation of the inner wall towards the front of the case. The side with the indentation has about 1 inch or 2.54 centimeters of clearance, and the other side has a half inch or 1.27 centimeters of clearance. This gives space in the front for the majority of the cables and clearance for the other cables such as the CPU power cable and other possible cables. Not to mention, it's very easy to stuff cables in the PSU basement as well. There's also plenty of cutouts to maximize cable routing. There's 2 cutouts for the front panel, one on the bottom and one in between the SSD trays, and they can fit a Molex connector through them. In the rear, there's 3 cutouts, one towards the front for the front I/O and top mounted fans, and there's one in the middle for the CPU fan header and also top mounted fans, and one in the rear corner for the CPU cable and the rear fan. The cutout for the CPU cable is a must, otherwise it gets dragged across the board. There are cutouts in the side of the wall which support any of the cables going into the motherboard directly, and lastly, there are another 3 cutouts in the PSU basement. One for the front I/O connectors, another towards the side panel to channel the GPU power cable, and another cutout in the rear for the HD audio cable. I absolutely love all these cable routing options in this case. Very well thought out, and none of them get blocked off by the motherboard or any other components. The last topic to cover is airflow, which is a must. It has turned into a trend to make the front panel a solid piece without any mesh cutouts for the front fans. This case blends the solid panel style with also offering airflow through the mesh. There is also ventilation coming in from the bottom of the front panel. The top of the case also has mesh ventilation, and the power supply basement has ventilation for the hard drive cage with vents above and on the side of the cage. Some of this airflow is also carried over to the power supply, which has its own ventilation coming from the bottom of the case. The inside is completely open as well, with no hard drive cages or optical bay drives to get in the way. Also, the top fan/radiator mounting is indented to keep the airflow from being obstructed by fans or a potential radiator. To test the airflow with this case, I ran idle and load tests on the GPU and CPU. At a normal fan curve, the FSP Windale 4 is cooling the Ryzen 1400, and the GPU being tested is the Gigabyte GTX 1060 OC Edition. I ran CPU-Z to stress the CPU and FurMark to stress the GPU. The Ryzen 1400 ran at 31 degrees Celsius idle and 51.5 degrees Celsius under load, and the 1060 ran at 45 degrees Celsius idle and 76 degrees Celsius under load with fan speed at 60%. Now yes, the cooler on the CPU is responsible for cooling the CPU, and the same applies for the GTX 1060 heatsink. The point to be made is that these heatsinks can perform normally without being restricted of airflow, in which we would see higher temps and potential thermal throttling. And yes, the temps for the 1400 and the 1060 are safe. FurMark really burns in the GPU. 76 degrees Celsius for 60% fan speed is relatively good. So yeah, I think I've touched on every aspect of this case I can cover. Overall, it's one of the best cases I've built in. Very easy to build with, plenty of room for components without blocking off cable routing holes. Everything aligned properly and was all around just a pleasure to build in. The quality of this case is outstanding. There's details to everything from the well-made thumb screws, well-made tempered glass panel, to the rubber mounts on the hard drive trays and orientation arrows, to the cable routing holes, to the user manual and case screw labels. The entire interior of the chassis is made out of metal with no sharp or jagged edges. The cable management is a dream with this case, with plenty of options for cable routing, and keeps you from stuffing too many cables through one area to keep you from putting the rear panel on. If there are any negatives to this case, it would be extreme nitpicking. But the only things I would have liked to have seen is rubber grommets on some of the cable cutouts that are visible through the side window panel. Also, the mounting for the side window panel can be a little weird with the rubber standoffs coming off. And lastly, it would have been nice to have seen RGB LEDs instead of one fixed color for the blue illuminated logos. But like I said, they're subtle and remain rather neutral for most color schemes. It's also worth noting that the glass side window panel is slightly tinted, which some people may like and others may not. That ultimately comes down to preference. For me personally, I like the look of the tinted glass. Another preference to some may be to have more hard drive options available apart from the two 3.5-inch drives in the PSU basement. But personally, I think they maximize storage space without compromising airflow and component size compatibility. So again, that comes down to preference. For me though, this is one of the few no compromise PC cases I've seen for under $100, and personally I think this case is better than some of the higher price bracketed cases. The Raidmax Sigma features style with functionality, fusing a beautiful design that ironically matches the panels above my setup. The metal accents on the panels are actual brushed aluminum and not a fake lookalike. The mesh design is a must, and I'm glad Raidmax stuck to it with this case, since the trend seems to be pointing into the direction of a closed surface in the front. Bottom line is, it's stylish, functional with airflow, easy to build with, roomy, and very well made. For $80, this case is definitely worth the money, and if you can find it for cheaper, it should be considered stealing. Raidmax brought it all to the table with attention to detail in every aspect. I am very impressed with this case. I hold this tier of quality near the quality of the Vantex Entho Pro, which in my opinion is one of the best cases on the market, even with being a couple years old. Now, Raidmax may not be the most popular case manufacturer on the market, but they certainly created a heavy-hitting entry with this one. I highly recommend it, so much so that I'm giving it the official TSG certification. The Tech Setup Gear certification is a certification for an outstanding piece of hardware for its price, offering the potential maximum value for its price bracket. Link for this case is in the description below. I hope you all enjoyed the review. It took quite a while to craft a level of depth worthy of displaying the full value of this PC case. If you would like to support the channel, I have a Patreon page where you can help decide topics for future videos and aid funds to hardware you want to see reviewed with this amount of depth. Also, check out my website techsetupgear.wordpress.com, where I post my reviews prior to posting them on YouTube. If you liked the video and you want to see more like it, consider subscribing and checking out the rest of the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.